Every MMA joint lock types
Explained. From the shoulder-destroying Kimura that broke Frank Mir's arm to the ankle-twisting straight foot locks that made Ken Shamrock a legend, joint locks are the chess moves of combat sports. Shoulder locks, the original fight enders. Let's start with the granddaddy of all joint locks, shoulder submissions. The shoulder is a ball and socket joint,
which makes it incredibly mobile, but also incredibly vulnerable. Think of it like a door hinge that can swing in multiple directions. That flexibility is both its strength and its weakness. The Kimura is the most famous shoulder lock, named after Masahiko Kimura, the judoka who used it to break Helio Gracie's arm in 1951. But in MMA, we've seen it evolve into an art form. Frank Mir's destruction of Tim Sylvia at UFC 48 wasn't just a submission, it was a statement. Mir trapped Sylvia's arm in that figure four grip and cranked it until the bone snapped like a twig. The sound echoed through the arena, and suddenly everyone understood that joint locks weren't just about tapping out, they were about permanent damage. The beauty of the Kimura lies in its versatility. From closed guard, it's a constant threat that forces opponents to keep their arms tight. From side control, it becomes a high percentage finish because you have all your weight pressing down while isolating that shoulder. Fighters like Demian Maia have turned the Kimura into a positional tool. Even when they don't finish it, they use the threat to advance position or set up other attacks. Then there's the Americana, the Kimura's evil twin. While the Kimura bends the arm away from the body, the Americana forces it toward the spine. Matt Hughes was a master of this from mount. He'd wait for opponents to push up, creating that perfect angle, then lock in the key lock and crank until they tapped. The psychological warfare was just as important as the physical technique. But if you think shoulder locks are just about brute force, the omoplata will change your mind completely.
The omoplata, where flexibility meets devastation. The omoplata is the most unique shoulder lock in MMA because it uses your legs to attack their arms. It's like using a wrench to turn a bolt. Your legs become the tool and their shoulder becomes the target. This isn't just a submission, it's a position that opens up an entire world of attacks. Nate Diaz has made the omoplata famous in modern MMA, but not always for finishing it. Watch his fight against Gray Maynard. Diaz locked in the omoplata, and even though Maynard didn't tap, the position allowed Diaz to control the entire sequence. He could sweep, he could transition to other submissions, or he could simply hold the position and land strikes.
The rubber guard variation, popularized by Eddie Bravo's 10th Planet System, takes the omoplata to another level. It requires incredible flexibility, but when executed properly, it's nearly impossible to defend. The attacker uses their leg flexibility to create angles that shouldn't exist, trapping the opponent's arm in positions where escape becomes a puzzle with no solution. What makes the omoplata particularly dangerous is that it's often a surprise. Opponents expect arm bars and triangles from guard, but the omoplata comes from angles they don't see coming. By the time they realize what's happening, their shoulder is already compromised and their options have disappeared.
Elbow destruction, the armbar evolution. If shoulder locks are about control, elbow locks are about pure mechanical advantage. The elbow is a hinge joint. It only bends one way. When you force it to bend the wrong way, something has to give, and it's usually not the technique. The armbar is the most fundamental submission in MMA, but calling it simple would be like calling a Ferrari just a car. Ronda Rousey turned the armbar into an art form, finishing 9 of her 12 MMA wins with variations of this technique. Her setup from the clinch was poetry in motion. She'd use her judo background to throw opponents, then immediately transition to the armbar before they could even process what happened. But the armbar isn't just about the finish, it's about the setup. From guard, it requires perfect hip movement and timing. You're essentially creating a fulcrum with your hips while using your legs to control their posture. John Jones showed this perfectly against Vitor Belfort. He didn't just crank the arm, he systematically broke down Belfort's defenses, isolated the limb, and then applied pressure with surgical precision. The belly-down armbar variation adds another dimension of control. Instead of finishing on your back, you roll to your stomach, which eliminates most escape routes. Frank Mir was notorious for this variation. Once he got you in that position, escape was virtually impossible because he could use his entire body weight to hyperextend the elbow. Flying armbars represent the spectacular side of the technique. They're high-risk, high-reward moves that can end fights in seconds or leave you in terrible position if they fail. But when they work, like Shinya Aoki's flying armbar against Mizuto Hirota, they become legendary moments that define careers.
Quick pause. If this breakdown is opening your eyes to the chess match happening on the ground, smash that like button. It genuinely helps us create more in-depth content like this.
The forgotten art, wrist locks and spinal attacks. While most fighters focus on the big joints, the small ones can be just as devastating. Wrist locks are the stealth bombers of joint attacks. They're legal, they're effective, and most fighters never see them coming because they're so focused on defending the obvious threats. The challenge with wrist locks in MMA is the gloves, but creative fighters have found ways around this limitation. They're often used as transitional attacks or to create openings for bigger submissions. The key is catching opponents when they're posting their hands or trying to frame. That's when the wrist becomes vulnerable and isolated. Spinal locks represent the most controversial category of joint attacks. The twister, popularized by Eddie Bravo and famously used by Chan Sung Jung against Leonard Garcia, is a lateral spinal lock that creates excruciating pain by twisting the spine in an unnatural direction. It's not just about the submission, it's about the psychological impact of knowing your spine is being manipulated. Neck cranks fall into this category too, and they're particularly nasty because they attack the most vulnerable part of the spine. The can opener from guard might look simple, but it creates tremendous pressure on the cervical vertebrae. Fighters like Matt Hughes use neck cranks not just to submit opponents, but to make them so uncomfortable that they'd make mistakes trying to escape. But if you think upper body joint locks are complex, wait until we dive into the revolution that's completely changed modern MMA. The leg lock revolution, redefining the ground game. For decades, leg locks were considered the domain of specialists and risk takers. Then fighters like John Danaher's Death Squad, Gordon Ryan, Gary Tonon, and others proved that leg locks weren't just viable in high-level competition, they were dominant. This revolution has completely changed how modern MMA fighters approach the ground game. The straight ankle lock is the gateway drug of leg submissions. It's the first one most fighters learn because it's relatively safe to practice and the mechanics are straightforward. You're simply hyperextending the ankle joint. But don't let its simplicity fool you. Ken Shamrock built a career on ankle locks, and fighters like Frank Mir have used them to finish world-class opponents. The key to a successful ankle lock isn't just the grip, it's the hip positioning. You need to create that fulcrum with your hips while controlling their leg with your arms. When done correctly, the pressure builds gradually until the opponent has no choice but to tap or risk serious injury. Knee bars operate on similar principles, but target a much larger joint. The knee is more complex than the ankle, with multiple ligaments and cartilage that can be damaged. Dean Lister was one of the first to really showcase knee bars in high-level MMA, using his long limbs to create leverage that shorter fighters couldn't match. The rolling knee bar adds a dynamic element that catches opponents off guard. Instead of a static attack, you're using momentum and timing to secure the position before they can defend. It's like a surprise attack that uses physics as your weapon. Heel hooks, the most feared submission in MMA. But if we're talking about leg locks that strike fear into fighters' hearts, nothing compares to the heel hook. This isn't just a submission, it's a career ender. The heel hook attacks the knee through rotational pressure, and unlike other joint locks where you feel the pressure building, heel hooks can cause catastrophic damage before you even realize you're in danger. The inside heel hook twists the heel inward, creating tremendous torque on the knee joint. The outside heel hook does the opposite, but both can destroy multiple ligaments simultaneously. What makes makes heel hooks particularly dangerous is that the damage often occurs before the pain, which means fighters might not tap in time to prevent permanent injury. Ryan Hall has become the poster child for heel hooks in modern MMA. His systematic approach to leg entanglements isn't just about the submission, it's about creating a web of control where every movement the opponent makes only tightens the trap. Hall doesn't just attack the heel hook, he creates positions where the heel hook becomes inevitable. The leg entanglement positions that set up heel hooks have their own complex hierarchy. The Ashi Garami, the 50-50 guard, the saddle position, each one offers different angles of attack and different levels of control. It's like having different tools for different jobs, and master leg lockers know exactly which tool to use in each situation.
Compression, locks, pain as a weapon. Not all joint locks work through hyperextension or rotation. Compression locks, or slicers, use a different approach. They compress muscle against bone to create unbearable pain that forces a tap. These techniques blur the line between joint locks and pain compliance, but they're devastatingly effective. The bicep slicer works by wedging a hard surface, usually your forearm or shin, into the crook of the opponent's elbow and then flexing their arm. This crushes the bicep muscle against the humerus bone, creating pain that's impossible to ignore. It's not just about the immediate discomfort. The pressure can also affect the elbow joint itself. Calf slicers operate on the same principle but target the lower leg. By wedging your shin behind their knee and forcing their leg to bend, you're compressing the calf muscle against the tibia. The pain is immediate and intense, but there's also significant pressure on the knee joint that can cause structural damage. What makes compression locks particularly effective is that they're often unexpected. Fighters train to defend arm bars and chokes, but slicers come from positions where opponents think they're safe. They're also cumulative. Even if you don't finish the submission, the pain and muscle damage can affect your opponent for the rest of the fight. The beauty of joint locks in MMA isn't just their effectiveness as fight enders, it's how they've evolved the entire sport. Every position on the ground now has multiple submission threats, which means fighters can't just focus on one aspect of grappling. You need to understand the entire ecosystem of attacks and defenses, because in MMA, every joint is a potential target and every position is an opportunity. The fighters who master this complexity don't just win fights, they control the very language of ground combat, turning the human body into both weapon and target in the most sophisticated chess match in all of sports. That's every major joint lock type that's shaping modern MMA. If you're fascinated by the technical side of fighting, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments which submission you think is the most dangerous. Are you team heel hook, or do you believe the classics like the armbar will always reign supreme? Either way, we'll see you in the next breakdown where we dive even deeper into the science of combat.